Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Adventure Paradox podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. I have been trying to get her on the show for years, as a matter of fact, but luckily, the last time we connected, we actually exchanged phone numbers, which is very important to take the next step. I'm so honored that you're here with us today, Mary Chris, and I will give you a formal introduction in just a moment. But first, can you tell our listeners where you're tuning in from and how you are today?
I am in Metamora, Michigan, which is in a thumb. We live in the state where you can actually point to where you live. You just stick your hand up and say, "This is where I live." So I live in the thumb of Michigan. It's a very much horse country. We have an active hunt here, and it's a beautiful day. The colors, we still have leaves on the trees, and the horses out in the field look great.
Oh, I love it. And did you grow up there? Has it always been home or?
I grew up in Detroit, and my grandfather had a creamery that was one of the last creameries with horse-drawn milk wagons. So I used to ride the horses in the alleys, which were not a lot of fun in Detroit. So when we got married, I already had horses, and our horses were up here in Metamora, so we moved here to be
Oh
with
my
them.
gosh. What a beautiful story. Okay. Let me give you a more formal introduction now for our listeners. So, Mary Chris Foxworthy is a passionate advocate for horses. She works conscientiously to preserve their history and bring their stories to life in print and presentations. By the way, we first met at Briar Fest at the Kentucky Horse Park, but back to that in a moment. She has served on various equine association boards, held a judge's card in carriage driving, and worked as a research writer for the Equine Heritage Institute, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, contributing to 18 books in the Gloria Austin collection. Mary Chris, we know where she lives, in the hunt country of Metamora, Michigan, and she enjoys cherished family moments with her husband, children, grandchildren, beloved bearded collie, and of course, four family-owned horses. Okay, can we start with your horses? Who are your four horses?
Four horses. Let's see, the oldest one is Hark. He's the Briar horse. He's a Morgan. He's 27.
Mm.
Next in line is Rosie. His real name is Romano Imperator. He's a PRE. He's 18 years old, and he was a gift to me from Gloria Austin.
Oh.
He's a half brother to Fuego 12, the Olympic horse. And then the next one is a Morgan. He's big black guy. His name is Tyson. And then our baby is Tiger. His registered name is Green Tree Stormbell.
Oh,
So three Morgans and a Spanish horse that we call our Spanish Morgan.
let's talk a little bit about breeds because you are just a wealth of knowledge. Morgans specifically, what is it about Morgans? And I know you've done some writing about different breeds, but tell me a little bit more about Morgans.
Well, the Morgan motto is the horse that chooses you, which is very
Mm.
true. They're a very family-oriented breed. It's the breed originated in 1789. A gentleman by the name of Justin Morgan was a school teacher, music teacher, and somebody owed him some money and they paid him with a horse. So naturally, everybody's like, what are you going to do with that? It's a horse. And it turns out that the horse was so amazing. He could do so many things. And no matter what people bred to that horse, he was able to reproduce himself. And that horse was Justin Morgan's horse. So that's how the breed got started. It's the only breed in the world that you can trace back to one horse. So you can every person who owns a Morgan can trace their horse back to Justin Morgan, which is pretty cool.
Is very cool. It really is
Very
very
cool.
cool. Now, something that is very sad is this, and we were talking about this before we started recording, but the Equine Heritage Institute was founded by Gloria Austin. I actually did not know Gloria Austin, but it sounds like she was a personal friend of yours. Can you just tell us a bit more about who she was and what the institute was, your connection there?
Uh, Gloria, a remarkable person. She owned a large museum in Florida. Besides the institute was part of the institute was the museum. It was the largest carriage museum, which had the history of carriage driving in this museum in America. Beautiful museum. It told the history of driving with carriages. She also did presentations and she did PowerPoint. She traveled all over the world. She was just a wealth of knowledge. She had a huge library, which I was fortunate enough to use when I did a lot of the writing for her. She had connections all over the world, generous, gracious, most kind person, fun to be with. She passed away about a year and a half ago, so the Institute is no longer in existence. But Gloria was a very remarkable person. In the carriage world, everybody knew Gloria.
Oh, so powerful hearing you talk about her and how she contributed to the incredible work you have been doing in the world. I know that when she passed and the museum essentially liquidated, there was a huge estate sale. And I
Yeah.
know that you purchased some things. Could you tell folks what that experience was like and what you got?
Well, Well, it was kind of like old home week because everybody knew who Gloria was there. So her
Mhm.
family was there and a lot of our friends from the carriage driving world. And it was sort of like having another memorial for her because as you saw, she had probably thousands of paintings. And the buying trips that she went on to get all of this stuff and the knickknacks and the little things and the history behind them. She had one thing one time and I said, "What in the world is that?" And it was this big metal object. It looked prehistoric. It was used in the 1800s to trim the horses. It was a singer. And you would light this thing up, and it was actually heat and flames inside that they used to trim the horses. But I mean, just the remarkable stuff that she had in her collection at that sale. She had a coach a golden coach, and you could just Google this. It's a coach, Gloria Austin, and you'll find it. She found it in a movie studio lot out in, I think it was Oregon. Turns out it was actually owned by the Habsburgs. So it was used in two movies. It was used in A Prisoner of Zenda and Juarez. And then she sent it back to Europe and had the whole thing restored. She actually found the loom that the fabric, all the upholstery was made on, had that all done. The whole thing was gilded in gold. She went to Spain and bought white horses, which was our Rosie. She went to Spain and bought the horses to pull it because she needed six white horses to pull it. She had all the livery made. She had the harness made. Just the most amazing thing. And so that was in the sale. She had a reproduction stagecoach made. Carriages, the collection of carriages she had was remarkable in harness. And we were fortunate enough to get, it's called a Hempstead cart. It's a very simple cart. It's two-wheeled, natural wood. And it was used, that style of cart was used mostly in New England and in New York area. It was used to chase the hounds on the hunt. So it was a very cross-country kind of cart.
And
So
it's
that's what we
also a
went with.
stunning cart. Didn't you have it at the Villa Louis, which is like the
Yes,
biggest carriage driving competition in the
yes,
nation, I believe?
it is. Yeah, and it won the turnout class, so that tells you it was pretty nice.
It's very
Yeah,
nice. And I
yeah.
think, something I'd love to hear a little bit more. I'm thinking about two questions right now. One is you mentioned that she had the full history of carriage driving, and I'd love to touch on that. The other question I have that I think our listeners will find interesting is the dress. As we continue to show up and do shows, where is that dress coming in the standard? What time period is that coming from? I've always been curious about that.
So the dress that we use for carriage driving at a show is what we wear today. There's no costumes. So,
Mm.
but we do wear a lap robe because that's to keep our clothing clean so that, if we do go somewhere, we take it off and, whatever we're wearing underneath, but there's no costumes. The best part of carriage driving though is the hats. It's like Kentucky Derby on steroids.
Of course.
Yeah. If you ask anybody who drives carriages how many hats, they're too embarrassed to tell you how many they have because you just don't admit it.
Mhm.
It's very addictive to buy the hats.
So true.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, so
it's
true.
it's so much fun. But you just asked me something else. What was
The
it?
history, the history
Oh, the
of
history.
carriage driving. How did it start? And I'm especially, and I'm guessing you're going to speak on this, but curious about the history in America and also the history, starting in Europe, like all the way back, because we've been working with horses for 5,000 years. When
Right.
did we start getting in something attached on wheels behind a horse? I'm so curious.
Yeah. So in my Hoofbeats Through History that I wrote, I touch on that because what it is, it's four books written by horses that tells the history of the world from a horse's point of view. So each one of our horses has written a separate book. And then we have a program with that we take to schools and we bring the horse to the school and he kind of tells the story and we have hands-on activities. So one of the questions I ask the kids is that question. When did people start driving horses? And the answer is that kids have no concept of time. 1939, things like that. And when did we first have cars? Uh, 2000? I said, no, we had cars longer than that. But when you
Oh,
think about it, we've been driving horses, like you said, for 6,000 years, and the car's only been here for about 150. So
yeah.
history was built on horses and wheels. So the first thing that was driven was a chariot.
Mm.
And when they go back and look at chariots, they think that the first one was in Mesopotamia. So that's thousands and thousands of years ago, 1200 BC. So it was a long time ago that people started driving chariots. And then because they couldn't communicate, it took it hundreds of years before people in Europe found out about chariots. So here these people are, in Mesopotamia driving chariots, but it took hundreds of years to get to Europe to find out. So things didn't advance as quickly as we're used to today. So it
Oh,
took a long time. But then eventually in the Middle Ages, you think about horses in the Middle Ages, people were riding them more than they were driving them because the vehicles were not comfortable. They didn't have springs, and all
mm,
that kind of stuff. So they're pretty, there weren't roads. So people were
mm,
riding more than they were driving. And then, as it progressed into the, age of discovery and the Renaissance, technology got better and the carriages got better. But then a lot of the people who could afford them they were too royal and they didn't want people sitting in their carriages with them. So you'll see all these old paintings of people sitting in the carriage, but outriders called postilion riders would be actually sitting on horses driving them because they're not
right.
allowed to sit. And that's where the word posting comes from because the roads were so bad that they had these postilion riders riding these horses to pull the carriages, but they were so bad, it was so bumpy. So the riders started going up and down with the horse, and they were postilion riders. So that's where the word posting comes from, is the postilion riders. But
I
in
had no
America, the
idea.
same thing held true that, our roads weren't really good. So it took a long time in America before people were actually driving horses. And probably one of the first things that they were driving. Have you ever heard of the Conestoga wagon? It kind
Mm-mm.
of looks like a stagecoach, only much larger. So in the early colonies, they were using the Conestoga wagons to transport the freight to the far west, which at that time was like Ohio. So they were using these big Conestoga wagons and Conestoga horses to transport everything. And one of the things we do with the kids when we talk about because we go through the history, get to the Conestoga wagon, we asked them, well, what do you think they did if they fell off the road? Because these roads weren't really good. I mean, they couldn't call AAA, and they didn't have the horns. They couldn't honk on the horn, and they didn't have headlights. So what did they use? And the kids can never get it, but it's bells. They covered
Mm.
all of these wagons with bells. So if they fell off the road, and they needed help, someone else would come along and they didn't have a lot of money, so they would pay them with their bells and say, thank you very much. So if you arrived wherever you were going with your bells on, you would say, you arrived with bells on because you arrived safely. So a lot of this stuff, yeah, it all goes back to horses. A lot of these sayings and things.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And it's interesting because I would have had no idea that arrived with bells on came from that. I don't
Yeah.
know what I thought it meant, but that's amazing. There are some more obvious idioms, and I know you've written a book about horse idioms, which I think maybe you said you
Yeah.
have close by. I love horse idioms, and some of them are, straight from the horse's mouth, more
All
obvious.
right.
Clearly, it's a
Right.
horse idiom. Others, I think, are a bit more nuanced, and I would love to hear what your favorite one is, or some of your like top three,
Oh,
then ask you about a
the
few
bells
others.
on is a good one. But
That's
the other
really
good one is, yeah, it's Charlie horse. So, Charlie horse, I mean, you think horse. Well, it's because back in the beginning of baseball, when they needed to roll the fields, they had horses come out and they called all the horses Charlie for some reason. So these horses would come out and they kind of plod along and limp and just, oh my gosh, trying to pull these big things across the baseball field to flatten it out. And so when the players came out and if they were limping and were having a bad day, they would call them Charlie. Oh, that guy's got a Charlie horse.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of funny. You wouldn't have thought baseball, but that's where that one came from.
I never would have thought that. I definitely never would have thought that. Um, I'm curious about the cart before the horse specifically. I had this, so I always knew that kind of means it's in the wrong order, right? As I've
Right.
been doing more research about it, I wondered if there was, it looks like at one point, an actual, no pun intended or pun intended, push to see if they could put a cart in front of a horse and literally have the horse push the cart, but mechanically, with their muscles and so on, pulling, right, or
Right.
carrying weight on their backs, pushing not so much. So I was curious about that, but the other thing I was curious about is I've gotten to know more about carriage driving, and tell me if you think this idea is off or not, but your carriage must fit your horse. So if you have a smaller one, like mine is for a pony, he's a little guy, right? That's not
Right.
going to fit on a full-sized horse.
No.
So if your horse passes on and you need to get a new horse, is it possible that the cart before the horse is really like putting the technology or the machine before the animal per se? Because you're going to be looking for, say, a 14 hand or certain size horse only to fit your cart. I'm curious.
Right. Well, that again goes back to history. Well, when you look at when people actually used these vehicles for purposes, like a park vehicle was used in the park, a gig was used in the city for the businessman to go. They had them custom made, just like we have our cars today. You used to be able to go to the car shop and say, I want it blue and I want this kind of leather and I want, well, they would do the same thing. The Brewster is a very well-known carriage manufacturer. Most of these carriage manufacturers then went on to make auto bodies. But the records, they still have all the records for the Brewsters. So you can go back and look at the serial number of your Brewster, find out who ordered it and what color it was and for what size horse. So they would order them specifically for the size of horse that they have. Nowadays, we when we buy these antiques, you look at them and they're made for specific size horses. So you have your horse. If you have your horse first, then you go, okay, my horse is 15-1. I need to find a carriage that's going to fit a 15-1 horse. And there are measurements and everything that you can use to know what size is correct for your horse. But if you buy a carriage first, and you say, well, now I got to go find a pony because this carriage is for, so you put the cart before the horse because you bought it
Exactly.
first.
That's what
But
I
back
thought.
it, yeah, but back originally, they were specifically ordered for an animal that the person had, is how
Right.
they did it.
So interesting. But then that expression of things in the wrong order was that people were hanging on to carts and looking for horses because they had the cart first because they
Yes, exactly.
personalized it. That's what I thought.
Exactly, exactly. And it's so amazing that they still exist, that,
Yeah.
they haven't been destroyed or they haven't been just put out on somebody's front lawn. That's what's amazing about some of these carriages, that they're still here and we're
Yeah.
using them.
Yeah, for sure. I had no idea until I started driving pony carts how transformative it would be for me. I just didn't know. I've been a lifelong horse person, right? It sounds like you started driving maybe at the creamery when you were a child. What is your origin story of driving carriages?
I was riding first, not
Yes.
driving. Yeah, I was riding first. And we were invited to a thing called the Year of the Morgan that was at the Kentucky Horse Park in the early 80s. And Martha DuPont was the one who organized it. And they used to do this thing where they told the history of the Morgan horse acted out by Morgans. So the horse we had at the time was a very good what they call a road hack horse. So she wanted him to represent the road hack. So we get down there and back then at the Kentucky Horse Park, there was only the big barn. That's all they had there with the 16 by 16 stalls. And we obviously did not big enough bedding for a 15 by 16 stall. So this guy in overalls with keys hanging off his overalls, he comes out to help us bring in everything. And he's showing, here's your stall. Then at the end, he goes back, and when he's done helping us, he went to the end of the aisle and was cleaning a harness on a hook. I thought, oh, the guy must drive the wagons around here for tourists or whatever. So the next day, the whole thing starts, and there's a friend of ours, ends up being a very good friend of ours, John Greeno from Vermont. He's the narrator from the thing, and we met him there. And he said, I saw your horse today. He came and talked to us, and he goes, your horse moves fantastically. You should get into carriage driving with this horse. I thought, what's carriage driving? I don't know what that is. And I thought, okay, whatever. So the next day, the part of the demonstration is this guy comes out with a four in hand, which means four horses of black Morgans and this beautiful carriage. And it's the guy with the overalls, and it ends up being Henry E.I. DuPont. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, we're gonna do that. I don't know, that's carriage driving. So this John Greenall says to us, well, you don't have to start like that. He says you can start with one horse and one carriage. He said, where do you live? And I said, Metamora. He said, oh, I know someone near you who does that. He says, you get in touch with them and they'll get you started. And they did. It was Carrie and Bill Kennedy. And we went over to their house and he says, does your horse drive? I said, yes. He goes, we have a show coming up in a couple of weeks. Would you like to come? I said, I don't have a. I don't have that kind of harness, So he said, oh, just show up. His wife had ponies, but he had one horse-sized carriage. He repainted it for us, gave us a harness to use. We went to the show, won every class we went in. And normally if we went to a Morgan show and you won, people look at you like, you're the competition we have to get. Instead,
Mhm.
these people were so kind and so wonderful. I thought, I like this sport.
Yeah.
So and that's the way carriage driving is. And then we still
Yeah.
ride. I show dressage and I ride more than I drive because it's kind of like riding a bike. Once the horse knows how to drive, you make him better by riding him.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think one exception is I can't ride my 350-pound pony, but I
Yeah,
can
right.
drive him.
Yeah, right, right,
He's
right.
very fun to drive, and we even got into ski joring with him,
Oh, that's fun.
which is super fun.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so speaking of fun, and I just love what you shared. And my friends who got me into carriage driving said the same thing. They said it's not like other horse shows. It's so community oriented because everyone's
Hmm.
kind of looking out for each other. You're not competing against each other. Everybody wants what's best for everybody. You help each other, hook up, all the different things. You're going to head someone else's horse. Like it was such a beautiful experience of the camaraderie. And I really wonder, is it the history? Is it just the nature of when you have an animal connected to a carriage and a human getting in it and someone, working with the horse? It's why do you think it is that way?
There's so many things. When you ride a horse, you're there, you're sitting on that horse. It's the communication. It's so, especially with like our PRE. I mean, those are very unique horses. You think that they do it, so it's different. But when you drive, all you have is your hands and your voice.
Mm,
So to become one with the horse when that's all you have, I don't know if I want to say empowerment, but there's something about it that just makes it feel so like, wow, I'm really one with this horse because all I have is my hands and my voice. And
mm,
all of this is happening. They're doing the three trots, they're backing, they're halting, they're doing obstacles, they're doing all of this stuff, and all I have is my hands and my voice. So I mean that's one thing. The other thing
yeah.
is we do pleasure driving, which is not combined driving is the ones where you see the metal carriages with the shocks of the brakes. That's more, cross country, rough and tumble. We do the
Mhm.
carriage driving, which it's either antiques or reproductions of antiques. So that's the other thing that's so remarkable about it is learning the history of the carriage, what it was used for, maintaining it, keeping it in good shape, learning the history, who owned your carriage. If you can find that out with a Brewster, you can. So, I mean, there's that whole aspect of it too, besides just being with the horse. It's
Yeah.
quite remarkable.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And I love what you just said. And I actually had part of why it was so transformative for me and just such an awakening is I have a long background of you're not allowed to talk to your horse. You can't say
Yeah.
commands, you can't speak. And then to step into a space where actually it's important that you say your horse's name first before the
Yeah.
command
Wake them up.
because all the horses know their names. And just thinking about, wow, if we were on a street 100 years ago, and we really, the high point of transitioning, and I've been doing a lot of this research about
Uh,
that turn of the century, and you probably know a lot more than I do, but it's amazing to think about what it was like when we had more horses than cars
mm.
on most major American streets, and then what that transition was like to go from being so connected, whether you were in a carriage with your voice in your hands or you were literally riding and you had the brainstem connection from one to the other, right? Either way, you were deeply connected to another living animal to move through space. And then here we go, we're in a car.
Yeah.
And how now we don't even feel the elements, right? It's fascinating. What do you think about that point in time, and how do you think it might have shifted humanity?
There's a picture that I use. I forget which book I put it in, and it's a find the horse, find the car, and it's only 1 year apart. And so in the one picture, it's all horses, and you can look really hard and you find the car, and the other one, it's all cars, and you can't find the horse. I mean, it's unbelievable to think that it happened that fast. Um, Coaching is a sport within carriage driving where the people drive very large coaches and they sit on top of it. I'm sure you've seen old prints of people with coaches and they drive four horses. Well, there's still people do coaching today. Your average person doesn't do coaching because you need staff and all sorts of things for coaching. And then the people who did it were people like the Vanderbilts and so on. So they would have their summer cottages in Newport, which, if you've ever been to Newport, Rhode Island, the cottages are thousands of square feet. Like the foyer of the Vanderbilt cottage is 50 by 50 by 50. These are mansions. They're unbelievable. So they would go doing their coaching in the summertime. Well, Emily Vanderbilt once said in New York City that they ruined society when they made Fifth Avenue one way because the whole part of the driving and being in these cities was a society thing where you
Mm,
could, like they say, see the new beau, see the new horse, and all this. And suddenly just making it one way ruined society. Once cars came along, also ruined society. That's when the Vanderbilt that died in Lusitania. He went to Europe with all of his horses and coaches to drive there because there were too many cars on the streets. But there were still people who wanted, especially the coaching people, they appreciated the cars, but they wanted to be with their horses. That was their sport, that was their fun. It wasn't transportation as much as it was sporting.
mm,
And that was all part of society back then. And even, when you think about it, most farms didn't have tractors till the 1940s. So it was a very long time before the horse was completely displaced from society. It was a
yeah.
long time that people still used their horses, use them, but they enjoy it, and we still enjoy them today.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Oh, it's so powerful. Here in Teton Valley, Idaho, there is a gentleman who still uses the ancient equipment with his horses to uh, pull the hay up, and they call it hay day.
oh
So
wow.
see 100-year-old equipment, in use, right? Fascinating. Wow. I'm right there at that point in time, and I can see those two images, and just things are changing so fast. And isn't it interesting how history repeats itself? Things are
Yes.
changing very fast right now, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
uncertainty and unknowns. And I'm curious, two things I'm curious about, especially, I'm preparing for this TEDx talk. So I'm thinking
Mhm.
about a general American audience. You have 1% who are horse owners. Now, you and I both know some of those horse owners, they may have never even met their horse. They own a racehorse somewhere, et cetera. Some
Yeah.
of them may actually live with them and be very close with them. There's a big range in that 1%. 30% of Americans are horse enthusiasts, but that leaves 70% people saying, why should I care? What does horse, right? Why? And it's interesting because when horse people get together, we get so excited,
It's
right?
like,
There's
yeah.
this energy in the room. And how do we, convey that to someone who's like, why? And I'm curious, the movement of equine assisted coaching, therapy, all of these different modalities, but also the history of understanding that ancestral connection, right? To
Mhm.
who we are at our core. We're wired for real connection, right?
Right, right.
And I think the other thing that's interesting is I've been unpacking history, the great manure problem, and
Oh
how
yeah.
there was, there was a lot of poop going on. It's true.
Yeah.
Like
And they never solved it.
and there, there were some tragic aspects of horses dropping dead on streets, being treated like living machines. We were pushing to the max of what a society based on horses could take, what the horses could take, right? So there's that space, which is a whole other chapter. But I'm just really curious, as you're sharing your books and sharing these stories and sharing this history, do you come up against resistance? People who are like, horses, no way, they smell, I'm afraid of them. There's a lot of fear. They're so big. And what's your response when people are maybe not necessarily against horses, but they could also be in this space of doesn't do anything for me. I don't, not interested. What are your thoughts?
I have to be honest, it hasn't happened. When
Mhm.
we do these presentations and we take the horse, they're to audiences if they've never seen a horse, they've never been close to a horse.
Right.
So and thank goodness our horse, the one who's the Briar horse, he's magnificent. He stands like a rock. And he'll have 20, 30 kids on him at one time, hanging all over him. The last time we went somewhere, all the girls were braiding his mane. But the thing that I do, and I think is so important, this is why I asked Gloria if I could write these books for children. I said, they don't understand that we've had horses for 6,000 years and how important that is. And we
Yeah.
do a whole thing about battles, and the team with the better horse wins because that's,
Mm.
you think of, Alexander the Great. I do a presentation and show them how his empire was 2 million square miles and he had to do it all on horse or foot. There was no cars. So, I mean, it just, when you give kids that kind of information, they look at it and go, they did that with just a horse? They did 2 million square miles on just a horse to put it in a concept where they can appreciate what humanity did with the horse for 6,000 years. they're just aghast by it. And when the teachers sit there and listen to it, they look at it a different aspect. And when the parents come
Mm,
and everything, they're going, I never knew that. To think about that, that's just amazing. But we haven't ever had, you'll get a couple kids that are a little shy about the horse, but when they see the other kids come up or the other adults come up,
mm,
lots of times we go to schools and have autistic children, and that's remarkable because they'll
yeah.
come up. And we had a nonverbal kid come up at one of the schools, and he started making all sorts of noise, and he was excited. So horses can also, like you were saying, with therapy and so on, they're important for that too. But I find that the appreciation for the lack of when they learn something that they never knew about the horse, that's when they start appreciating the horse. When they
Yeah.
realize this isn't just somebody's pet. This isn't just a racehorse or something that a cowboy, that I see on a Western on TV. This is a living being that actually had a very important part in world history that they
Mm,
never stopped to think about.
mm.
It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun.
Oh, it's really cool. And I think a piece of what I'm hearing is give them an experience of a real horse. I mean, that the
Yeah.
magic is, woo, like you can't explain it. You must experience it, to
Hmm.
know. Obviously preaching to the choir here, but
Right.
I have had those experiences when we lived in the suburbs of Chicago for 8 years. We would ride down the Des Plaines River Trail, and people would come up just in awe. I've never been this
Yeah.
close to a horse. I just didn't even realize. And when we look at the statistics of horses where it peaked, somewhere around the beginning of the last century, 24, 26 million horses in the
Mm.
United States, and then the all-time low point of 2 million, right? Middle of the last
Mhm.
century. And now we're around 7 million, I think, is the horse
Right.
census. Where do you think we're going from here? Like, and maybe two questions. Where do you think we're going, and where do you hope we're
We're
going?
going. I'd like to go back to no cars.
I know.
That's a hard question because, but, when you look at the ups and downs of it, but what I look at is how many young people are we getting into horses? It's not just horses, it's anything. Like if you belong to a Lions Club, it's all old people. If you belong to, Optimist Club, it's all older people. The younger generation, uh, they just don't seem to get wired into much of anything other than their phones. And that's
Right.
what's so, and they don't, you get the kids in high school are playing sports and things like that, but that's such a small percentage of the kids. And, it's a bigger problem than just horses. It's a problem of being aware. Like we always say when we go to the schools and I ask the questions, I always say when we're done, because my husband goes with me, I said they don't have a concept of how they fit into the big picture.
Mm,
And I
mm,
think that's the problem, not understanding how you fit into the big picture. And if you don't understand that, it's hard to make them appreciate a horse or want to be with a horse or any of that kind of stuff because they're just so, I guess, out of it is kind of,
mhm,
it's kind of
mhm,
disturbing in a way.
mhm.
My part that I do is just such a small part, but I think it's needs to be something that we address that, kids start understanding how they fit into the big picture of the world and humanity in general and appreciate the past and not lose the past so that you can still appreciate the past to use it in the present,
Yeah.
and it's that's the part that's the hardest, because horses they think of as something in the past that we have no need for in the present.
Right. Oh, man, I'm so blown away by your perspective and your insight and your wisdom. Like I'm right there with you, and I think, they're so out of it, they're so into it and it being their phones and the disconnection,
Mm.
the statistics on face-to-face communication in real space and how much it's gone down really since the pandemic, but the truth is since 2000. Why? It's
Oh,
because people stopped showing up in real space with each other. And I think for me, that's one of the things that's most powerful about working with horses specifically, because you have got to be present. We cannot phone it
mhm.
in with a horse, right?
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know when we got our PRE, they're very different to ride. And I took a lesson from somebody, and right away she said, "Stop! What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm on the circle, so I'm looking at the next point on the circle." She said, "Don't do that." She said, "With these horses, you have to be right there with them." She says, "If
Mm,
you're thinking ahead, they're going to go where you're thinking." And I
mm,
thought, "Wow, I never thought of that." She says, "You need to be in the moment." And I thought, "Well,
mm.
why shouldn't I ride all of my horses that way?" to be in
Right.
the moment. And why shouldn't I do everything in the moment rather
Everything.
than, oh, this is what I did, this is what I have to do, just be in the moment for a couple minutes and try it. And it's a horse will teach you that horses teach you a lot of things about
Oh,
yourself.
they really do. Oh my gosh, you are such a joy. I know we talked about the Hoofbeats Through History book series and educational. We really touched on that. I have not heard the story though about how H.D. Harkness became a Briar model because he actually inspired uh, what you were doing with all of this Hoofbeats for History and my Hoofbeats, follow my Hoofbeats work, all of
Yeah,
these things. Can
yeah.
you tell us a little bit more about how your horse became a Briar model horse? It sounds like a great story there.
That's the number one question we always get. Um, so one day on Facebook and Facebook Messenger, I got a message from someone I didn't know that said, "We'd like to make a model of your horse. Briar would like to make a model of your horse." I thought, "Who's scamming me now?"
Ah,
So I looked the person up. I thought, "Oh, she does work for Briar." So I called them and they said, "Yeah, we want to do a model of your horse." And I was like, "Really?" I said, "I mean, why?" And they said, "Well, and Briar has when they make new models for Briar Fest, they have a theme every year." And the theme was driving that year. And they said, well, your horse is a driving horse, and we'd like to. I said, well, how did you find him? I mean, why? And all they will tell you is we have a committee. And I think the reason they do that is because that is the number one question. And if I had the answer and I gave it to you, their phones would be ringing off the hook.
fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah. So that's all they'll tell you is they have a committee. So be on your best behavior. You never know when someone's watching you and your horse. They'll make a Briar model out of them. It's been a blast having a horse as a Briar model.
Well, and I have a few copies of H.D. Harkness because that was the first time I ever went to Briarfest, was the driving forward. And it was the same year I learned to drive. It was the same year I launched my podcast. And I really feel like podcasting, I had done some radio work in the past, but then I
Yeah.
was mom, young kids, all the things. It was birthed out of learning how to drive because it really
Mhm.
reactivated using my voice and thinking about, wow, what are we talking about? How are we contributing to the next generation? What is it that we're speaking on and why? Why? Why now? Why is it important? So for me, sharing horse stories and Briar is so good at doing that and capturing these
Oh,
horses,
they are.
and like really highlighting different stories because this is with my children. I'm like, yeah, the unicorns are great. Let's look at the real horses.
You're right. Yeah, Briarfest is an experience. If people haven't been there, it's an experience.
It's an experience,
Yeah.
yeah, and I appreciate it all. I mean, it all has the space, the fantasy and all those things too. But for me, the real horses, the real history, knowing, the history of Morgans and driving and all these beautiful things. And thank you so much for your contributions. We are going to wrap up, but I want to make sure people can find you. Can you please tell them your website, how they can get a hold of you, all those things?
Okay, the website is hoofbeatsthroughhistory.com. And the horses all have a blog on the website, so you can meet all the horses on the website that they've written the books. Hark has his own Facebook page, just HT Harkness. You'll find him on Facebook. He's very funny on Facebook. He's always talking about his pasture mates and what they've done today. So he's got a voice. Matter, we finally got our first run in ever. It's his run in. He goes into it sideways so nobody else can go in.
My
So yeah,
God.
check him out on Facebook. He's very funny.
Oh.
This has been great, Kat. I've loved it.
Oh, you are fabulous. And speaking of, in a moment, we'll go stream live to Facebook and say hi to those folks there. But thank you so much for listening, everybody. We will put all of those links into the show notes so they're easy for you to click on. And thank you so much, Mary Chris. You are a delight to chat with, and I hope
Oh,
we get to
thank
do it
you.
again. Hats
Me
off
too.
to you with your work. Thank
Major
you so
fun.
much. Next
Thanks,
time, bring your
Kat.
hat.
Okay, I can do that. One of them, one of the 100.
I know, right? Don't tell me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, don't
Thank you
tell
so much.
them. Thanks, Kat. Have a great day.
Thank you.